Good afternoon, everybody. Members, we only have one item, but it did seem an important item rather than cancel it and load up our agenda for October. I decided to go ahead, so hopefully you'll agree with that. As you know, during August can be difficult for with holidays and such like for actually bringing forward applications. So I can assure you there's plenty in the pipeline, so please expect October and November to be busy. With that then, we'll go into the official introduction. I'm Councillor Jim McKenna and I will be chairing this meeting this afternoon. And if I now go around the table, please introduce yourself. Starting with you, Daljit, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Daljit Singh. I lead the City Centre planning team.
Good afternoon, Jess Ashton, Principal Planner in the Central team.
Hello, Gillian MacLeod, Transport Development Services Manager.
Good afternoon, Caroline Gruen, Councillor for Bramley and Stanningley.
Good afternoon, Al Garthwaite, Councillor for Headingley and Hyde Park.
Good afternoon, Councillor Peter Carlill, Cavan Farsley Wood.
Good afternoon, Councillor Kaylee Brooks, Little London and Woodhouse Ward.
Hello everyone, Councillor Asghar Khan for Beaumont Hospital Richmond Hill Ward.
Good afternoon, Lewis Foote, and I'll be in charge of PowerPoint today.
Good afternoon, Sarah Holmes, Senior Technical Officer, part of the Ponds panel team.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Dan Cohen, Woodley Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Anne Forsyth, Farnley and Wortley Ward, and substituting for Councillor David Blackburn this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Colin Campbell.
Good afternoon, Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlin Wharfdale Ward.
Good afternoon, Stephen Varley, Design Officer.
Good afternoon, Andy Booth, Clerk to the panel.
Hello, Nikki Dio, Legal Advisor to this panel today.
Good afternoon, David Feeney, Chief Planning Officer for Leeds.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Thank you for that. Can I move to Andy, please? Could you introduce first five items, please?
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item number 1, with no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under item number 2, there are no items requiring the exclusion of the press and public. Under item number 3, there are no late items of business today. Moving on to agenda item number 4, do any members have any interest to declare? No. Moving on to agenda item number 5, we've got apologies for absence from councillors Maloney, Blackburn and Wadsworth, and we've got councillors Forsyth and Anderson present as substitutes today, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Andy. And sorry,
Chair, and I'm sorry to interrupt the meeting, but I'm just anxious. You may have noticed the news, Chair. I'm conscious this is the only formal meeting of council at the moment. You may have noticed the news, Chair, that Her Majesty the Queen is receiving treatment for significant ill health at the moment. And I'm just wondering whether, this being the only formal council meeting to take place at the moment, it may just be appropriate to send our thoughts and prayers and send our best wishes to Her Majesty and the royal family at this time.
Thanks, Dan. And obviously, I'm aware of it. I was sat in with the Lord Mayor on another matter when we would come through. It's one of these things we've never dealt with before. I mean, I'm totally in the hands of members because I haven't got any words of wisdom here. I think we're all people who have met Her Majesty probably is feeling rather upset with it all. So I will take any advice or any motion from anybody around the table to up a way of proceeding. I'll bring in
Chair,
Colin, please.
I think it is a difficult time, not just for ourselves, but particularly for the family of Her Majesty. I do think, though, that given her, and Councillor Anderson and I have just been discussing this, given her commitment to service, I think she would be slightly surprised that we would think about perhaps not holding a meeting. And I think it's important that we do carry on. But I would echo Dan's comments. I think it's important for us to, at this point in time, express our concerns for her health, our support for the family. And I don't know about the rest of you, but personally, I'll be saying a prayer for her.
Yes, I agree. I think very few people around this table would remember a time before the Queen being the monarch. I'm maybe one of the very few who remember watching the coronation, the first experience of television, and it feels like we've always had a Queen in this country. And I think it's important that we recognise that and her service to the country.
Just very briefly, I agree with all of the comments that have been made. And I have met the Queen once and seen her a couple of other times, which is slightly different from meeting her. And her commitment to duty was absolutely evident in every step she took. So I would absolutely endorse the statements that have already been made.
Just to thank us, actually, Councillor Khan will come in as well, I'm sure. Just say, thank goodness look, she is, please God, still with us, and long may that continue. But I think we, like Colin, I will certainly be saying a prayer and for her and all the members of the royal family. Long may she reign over us.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, as the former Lord Mayor and with yourself, the Chair, I wish her a speedy recovery as well, her Majesty, and I will be praying for her as well, for her health. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, we can do that, but are you happy to continue with the meeting? That's the decision for us. Sorry? It will be in the minutes, and I'm sure we can put a letter together, and we possibly have at a more appropriate time when we know how this is panned out, we can do that. Okay, but if during the meeting we have news that we hope doesn't happen, then we may have to consider whether we carry on or not. But it's only one item, so maybe we'll have concluded business by then. Okay. Can I then ask you to move to agenda item 6, please? It's the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of August, and it commences on page 7. I know there is one amendment or one addition that needs to be made. Can I bring indulgence on that, please?
Thank you, Chair. It refers to page 12, and it was the minutes of the proposals for the Claypit Lane site, and in particular at the top of page 12, and it's a 5th bullet point down. The officers in the presentation had highlighted to panel that we had received an objection from Harrogate Convention Centre and Harrogate Council to the multi-purpose events building. The officer had presented the fact that an assessment had been provided by the applicant about the potential impact of the events building on trade from Harrogate, and it was reported that up to 1% of trade would be diverted away from Harrogate and up to 6% from Harrogate Convention Centre. However, the minutes don't include the words up to. The minutes have said that 1% of trade will be diverted away from Harrogate and 6% from Harrogate Convention Centre. So the minutes actually state a worst case scenario. So it's really just a minor correction to include the words up to. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dalgid. Are we happy to make that adjustment? Yep. Andy, you'll see to that. Can I go back to the minutes from the start then, and I'll go through them in the usual way, page by page, and then give you the opportunity, should you want to So do you want to change anything or add anything? Starting at page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12, page 13, and that's the final page in this. Can I ask you if, with that adjustment, that we agree they're a true record? It's agreed. Is there any further matters arising? No. Well, in that case, can we then move on to our main item today, agenda item 7 on page 15. Can I briefly
Jessica.
Sorry.
Jessica.
Introduce Jessica Aston, who is our new principal planning officer, and she's the case officer on this. You're very welcome along. Big shoes to fill in, but I'm sure you'll manage it. I was thinking to Sarah, but I'm sure you will. And you've already been on the site visit and met most of the people on the planning. But there are a few words you need to say at this stage. So please.
Well, thank you for your kind introduction, Chair. It's good to meet everyone. It's good to be here. So this is just a pre-app from Your Housing Group, who are a registered affordable housing provider. They're proposing 130 units at the former Tyson Krupp site on Kirkstall Road. The scheme's proposed to be 100% affordable housing, although we'd be seeking to control a policy compliant level of affordable housing through a section 106, which is 7% in this location. And we've had a number of constructive meetings with Your Housing Group and their consultant team. So before I hand over to the developer, I just wanted to note an amendment in the report. So at paragraph 7.5.3, it should read, it should refer to a 4 to 6 story block and a 5-story block of apartments. Okay.
Can we note that? Thank you. Moving on then, can I invite there is John Brooks and his team to introduce it. They've done it many times before, so they're aware of the rules, but we might be a bit more flexible on time today as you're the only item, but please, when you're ready, start.
Thank you, Councillor McKenna, fellow councillors and officers. My name is John Brooks. I'm a director with the planning consultancy team of WSP.
And I'm Daniel Sutton, architect at AW Architects.
Okay, thank you. Your Housing Group, or YHG, is the owner of the Kirkstall Road site and the applicant on these proposals. They're one of the largest providers of affordable housing in the UK, managing over 27,000 homes across the Northwest, Yorkshire and the Midlands. And more information about YHG is contained in paragraph 1.2 of your officer's report. On this scheme, YHG are supported by WSP as planning consultants and AEW architects. There's also been advice provided on flood risk, drainage and remediation matters from Eastwood Consulting Engineers and on highways from Vectos. Sorry, I forgot my clicker. So let's that's the introduction. Right, let's go on to the next slide. Thank you. The site was previously occupied by Tyson Krupp for industrial purposes and accommodated a large industrial building. However, following the Kirkstall Road floods in 2015, Tyson Krupp vacated the site. Subsequently, a residential-led scheme submitted by Prospect Estates received a resolution to grant outline permission as City Plans panel in February 19. This resolution was never progressed to an outline planning permission as the Section 106 agreement was never signed. Nevertheless, it demonstrates that the principle of residential development in this location has been considered acceptable by the council previously. The Kirkstall Road site was acquired by YHG in September 2019. The building on site had already been demolished. YHG subsequently demolished the front wall on safety grounds. They then remediated the site, grubbing up the historic foundations and substructures, then pumping and removing from site a naphthalene plume that had settled on site following the 2015 floods. Planning permission was retrospectively granted for this work on the 12th of August. As you have seen today, the site is currently vacant and surrounded by hoardings. YHG have to date had 3 pre-application meetings with officers. Various planning matters associated with the proposal were discussed at these meetings, and we have received formal written advice from officers that arrived on the 22nd of July. The design team has responded positively to the comments that have been received and issued revised layouts to officers for comment. Following this meeting, we will engage with local neighbours and businesses by informing them of the proposals via a letter drop consultation exercise. Any comments received will be considered and incorporated into the proposals where possible. YHG intend to submit a full planning application in late September or early October, with the intention of securing planning permission by the end of this year. As part of YHG grant agreement with Homes England, development must be started by March 23 and completed by March 2025. Thank you. I'll hand over to my colleague, Dan.
Thank you very much, John. So our starting point in design development was to analyse the observations and opportunities of the site. There are 2 fundamental constraints which have been key to the evolving design. Firstly, the site's location will be flood zone free. This has resulted in an innovative approach to the design, raising the ground level of the dwellings above the floodwater level, whilst addressing the important issues of accessibility to provide a means of level access to all the homes across the site. Secondly, a Yorkshire water easement associated with surface water culvert runs across the site. It's identifiable on the presentation in teal. Development is not permitted on the easement, and as a result, the layout has responded to this constraint positively by utilising undevelopable space for ancillary usage, such as parking courts and landscaping areas. The proposed site plan demonstrates in more detail how we've responded to these constraints and opportunities. A clear separation in the apartment block because of the easement provides the opportunity to break up the massing and scale of Kirksall Road fronting apartment buildings, whilst introducing permeability and views into the heart of the site. The apartment buildings give a strong frontage to Kirksall Road and sit behind a landscape buffer of street trees, which will help to provide a green boulevard along the street scene. Behind these apartments, a large public green is sheltered from noise and pollution. An existing access is utilised to form a new adoptable highway route through the site, which allows for future expansion and does not stifle further opportunities to develop and development of the area. Townhouses raised above the flood level with associated private amenity space makes up the remaining accommodation on the site. There is a total of 130 dwellings with a split of 43 townhouses and 87 apartments, ranging from 1 to 3 bedrooms. The proposal is for a development that is 100% affordable, with 7% policy requirement being secured by the Section 106 agreement, as to not impact upon any funding opportunities. The townhouses and family homes are sheltered from Kirksall Road, reducing the impact of noise and pollution, providing improved open and private garden space, which is compliant with policy where feasible. The design has benefited from pre-application feedback and constructive commentary from the planning department, to which we have responded positively. Key responses to this feedback include the inclusion of the additional apartment block anchoring the corner of Kirksall and Viaduct Road, increased garden sizes and public community space, green edges to development throughout the site, connection to future regeneration via the new adoptable roads, a provision of 100% EV charging is now proposed on the scheme, and improvement works are proposed with the reinstatement of footways to redundant access points along the Kirksall Road frontage. All of the apartments are designed as a minimum to the nationally described space standards, with the inclusion of a number of Category 2 and 3 accessible apartments to meet with policy compliance as a minimum. Block 1 is a 5-storey apartment block, and Block 2 is a 6-storey apartment block, that includes articulation in its form to provide interest in Kirkstall. Working. Block 1, sorry, I'll start again with that one. Block 1 is a 5-storey apartment block, and Block 2 is a 6-storey apartment block that includes articulation in its form to provide interest in the Kirkstall Road fronting facade. These plans show the typical arrangement and layout. As you can see, Block 2 includes undercroft parking, ancillary usage such as cycle storage and refuse storage. Again, the houses are designed to nationally described space standards and are 2.5-storey townhouses with room in roof arrangement. We have a variation of house types, but all have open plan living arrangements and are designed as family homes with types 1 and 2, including rooftop amenity space. These homes are designed to sit above the flood level, either via raising the whole building or habitable rooms above the flood level. Access is considered via ramps designed into the layout or stepped approach, ensuring homes meet Part M accessibility standards. Appropriate scale is considered with an increased height fronting Kirkstall Road. Stepped building heights and articulation of the facade help to break up the massing. And the form of the architecture links with the industrial heritage with the use of sawtooth roofscapes. Consideration has been made regarding orientation to ensure building siting does not impact on overshadowing, and appropriate residential scale within the heart of the development to work alongside the recent mill conversion on Viaduct Road is also considered. In terms of materiality, hardware materials with longevity have been selected with a minimal palette of materials. These proposed materials include red multi-facing bricks with elements of brick detailing such as soldier coursing and feature brick panels, stone detailing with headers, sills and plinths, and standing seam metal cladding as can be seen on the roofscapes. This is to be developed in more detail as we progress towards a planning submission, but we have addressed initial feedback received regarding lighter bricks and do welcome feedback on the multi-red brick as an alternative solution. The architectural form picks up the industrial heritage of the area whilst acknowledging the emerging context closer to Leeds city centre. Window size in response to the repetitive nature of historic mill architecture whilst addressing Part O building regulations compliance. Relief is added to the facade modelling to add depth and interest whilst minimising materials, and repeating elements of materiality between the apartments and houses are considered in the design. We acknowledge the ground floor undercroft with increased landscaping and articulation in the facade, along with detailing that mimics the window form above. The south-facing facade of the apartments includes repeating inset balconies, providing amenity and views towards the south. We have linked material palettes and proportions between the apartments and the houses to create an appearance of one element and continuity in design. Houses are designed in an urban street appearance and where possible terminate on built form. Linking materials are shared between the apartments and houses, and the window proportions and story height complement each other to create a harmonious streetscape. The raised access terraces in front of the homes are incorporated into the strategy for refuse and cycle storage, and the boundaries are designed to complement the architecture and are key to the street appearance. This final slide presents a view of the Kirkstall Road street scene to give an indication of scale and form. I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank you for listening and welcome any questions regarding the proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, John. Can I open it up now to questions from members? Questions? Councillor Campbell.
Boy, that was a remarkable silence. I was expecting more people to dive in. Can I just ask an initial question in relation to materials? Because I'm looking at these. I have to say to you, looking at the artist's impressions, which are always bear no resemblance to whatever's built, but there does seem to be a lot of red brick and a lot of very similar red brick. And I've said on more than one occasion in these meetings that many of the areas of Leeds grew organically, I suppose is the best way to describe it, in that people would build some houses, then build another row. But they tended to be different builders, and so they built them in slightly different styles. And I think just looking at this, my initial response is there's a lot of sameness and not a lot of interest. So can I ask a question in relation to, in effect, why you're choosing one brick style for the entirety of the site?
Okay, thank you. The answer to that is that it's not something that we are limiting ourselves to. So we are obviously developing that further, and obviously we'll take on board your comments. We're happy to explore alternative options there to introduce perhaps an alternative palette of bricks. But yeah, that's something we can certainly consider.
If I can just ask a couple more. Looking at the entrance onto Kirksall Road, we've got a couple of views, one that comes on 15 here, and a similar one on 16. Just looking at these impressions, there's a certain blankness about the facades which face inwards onto that access road, and that corner facility next to the red bike. And I just wondered, given there seems to be quite a lot of articulation on the frontage further along, why you've gone for that relatively blank facade there, on what is effectively the gateway buildings to the entire development. And the final thing was, somebody said it's more or less policy, it's compliant where feasible. Where isn't it compliant, and why isn't that feasible?
Okay, so to answer the first question, just to clarify, are you referring to what we're describing as the south? What is the south elevation where we have the inset balconies? Okay, so the kind of gateway entrance. Yeah. Okay, so there's no reason why we can't explore adding further articulation to that. We have obviously included the kind of feature to that. I guess as you look at the visual there, you can see the kind of feature corner with the inset balconies. But we can further explore adding more interest to that. And obviously at ground floor we've got the entrance there. So obviously that would we're kind of looking to incorporate some full height glazing and kind of draw people into that as an entrance space, I guess. And then just clarify, what was your second question? Sorry.
You mentioned that various elements of it were policy compliant where feasible. So I'm asking which bits are not policy compliant and why wasn't that feasible?
Okay, thank you. Yes, so that was in reference to the amenity space. So in terms of the area overall, we are providing obviously quite a lot of public green space and amenity, but because of the nature of the arrangement of the houses and the fact that we're raising them up by a metre, it does make it slightly difficult to make sure that we're hitting the policy compliance in terms of the area. But as on a whole, as Jess has highlighted in her report, we are providing quite a lot of amenity across the site.
Thank you, Chair. Can you please outline me the boundary lines for the site, please?
Sorry, can you?
The question is, can you outline where the boundary lines are for this site?
Councillor Khan, thank you for raising that particular matter. I think the point that you're referring to is the fact that there is a hoarding and there is also a fence line. It's a point that we are aware of, and what I will be suggesting to our client, as well as the client solicitor, is that we actually walk those boundaries in the next few days. The red line boundary will reflect exactly the land ownership boundary of YHG. But I do appreciate that we cannot have a situation where, for example, even there's a 50-centimetre gap between sites. So I'll ensure that as part of the application, when it's submitted in, 4 to 8 weeks' time, that particular matter is thoroughly covered and addressed in the submitted red line site location and site plans.
Thank you for reassuring that. Next question is, can you just go through the travel plan for the site as well, where the services, how they're going to be accessing the site as well, please, such as refuge and emergency vehicles, how they will be coming into, and also taxis and other services in this site.
Yeah, okay. So what we're proposing is to use the existing access off Viaduct Road, and the roads within the site that we're proposing will all be to adoptable standard. So in terms of refuse vehicles, we have the appropriate turning circles and requirements to obtain that, and similarly with the emergency services and taxis.
Sorry, Councillor Khan, can I just expand upon that? I think in particular, we're also keen to ensure that there is vehicular permeability both north, south and east, west across the road, across the site. So if you look at the site plan, for example, on slide 10, you'll see at the bottom and the right of the screen, the roads just stop, and that's to allow future permeability to further sites both to the south and the west.
Yes. Thank you. Next question is, there's going to be 130 developments taking place, and we welcome that. There's going to be some young families going to be moving into the area. And where's the nearest schools for those families? And this question goes to the chief officer as well. What formula do we use to calculate how many young people will be living on this site? And also, do we look at this site as a one pocket size, because the whole area on that Kirkstall lane will be developed? Do we look at a whole area for such as schools, public health, GP surgeries, dental surgeries? How do we plan? And also, the rates for SIL money, is that the correct rate? Is it low? Is it high? What is it? How do we calculate that as well?
Thank you, Councillor Khan, for your question. On the schools issues, and just to step back from this application for a moment, in terms of all of the allocated sites within Leeds, either brownfield sites or greenfield sites that have been identified through the site allocations plan, we did some strategic work at the plan making stage, working with different providers, education, public health, different sectors, to gauge the level of infrastructure that's currently planned and to flag the future pressures arising from future allocations being delivered and existing brownfield sites, particularly within the urban area. And in support of the site allocation plan, we had something called an infrastructure delivery plan put together, and that was put in front of the independent inspectors at the SAP examination as a piece of evidence to say, this is the broad infrastructure to support the level of growth we are planning through this plan. And at the time, the inspector found that piece of work to be sound in terms of the overall level. And in terms of allocations, as part of that process, we also consulted internally with children's services about school places and where additional capacity was needed. So that's at a strategic level. In relation to this particular application, I'm not sure at pre-app stage if we've consulted with children's services, but certainly at a formal application stage, we will be consulting with children's services, and they will be able to advise us on capacity, and they have formulas to look at existing spaces, the location of existing schools, and how that sits within their overall modelling. So that will be picked up at that stage. And in terms of SIL are the same figures for everybody, and they're based on floor space, and it's a calculation of the floor space against the SIL schedule. So it's a bit of a formula in terms of the size of the units, what is the floor space, times by the SIL requirement for that type of development. So there will be the calculations included within the material, and they will be checked as the application comes through the process. Does that help, Councillor Khan?
David?
Sorry, David, if I may, and Councillor Khan, I just wanted to clarify, and it's not David's fault, he wouldn't necessarily know the full details of this. In this particular case, because the development is likely to be 100% affordable housing, there is an exemption for SIL charges for social housing. So the site itself won't generate any SIL. But David is quite correct, and Councillor Khan, you're quite correct in that SIL is the vehicle we've adopted as a council to pay for major infrastructure. And that is the way to fund the kind of infrastructure school infrastructure you've spoken about. But that's a wider strategic discussion rather than one for this particular site. Thank you, Chair.
You had that told you. Is that okay, Councillor Khan? Okay. Councillor Garthwaite, please.
Yes, I welcome the 100% affordability. Obviously, I think that's really good. But just because it's affordable, I think it doesn't have to look quite as plain. It's a bit reminiscent to me of the no frills range in the supermarket. Now, I do understand that this is only a pre-app and that there would be much more detail brought at a later stage. But I hope, are you open to adding a few more design features to what, to my mind, is a very plain looking development? I've got other questions, but I'll ask them one at a time, if I may, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. We will certainly take away your no frills range at the supermarket comment. Yes, we've engaged very constructively with Stephen Varley in particular and the other officers, and yes, we can let's say vary, review, etc., the design appearance of various parts as well as the palette of materials. So yes, leave that with us. I think this is part of an evolution of a design process that we've taken on board proactively to date, and we will continue up to the point that we submit the application. So thank you.
Thank
you. Before you ask your next question, can I bring Stephen Varley in, our architect, on this point, and then we can move on to your next question. Steve.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll say that again. Thanks, Chair. This is where, at the risk of being sacked, I'll be honest. I personally, I could discuss it outside of here, because if I set off now, I'll be on for an hour. But personally, I understand why perhaps councillors have said what they said, but I would have to say to you, this is quite a palatable scheme. I don't agree that it's boring. When you actually look at it, it's actually quite interesting, and it follows what I always say, architectural rules. A thing looks like what it is, and dressing it up doesn't help. I mean, I'll just refer to, it did dawn on me, if I just think I can get to the right page. I would ask if we could have oh yes. I'm looking at your slide, PDF page 15, the overhead.
Apologies, the internet's actually cut out, so I can't
Oh,
get
right,
that on at the
sorry.
moment in time.
well, members have printed copies anyway. It's the one that I can see Councillor Garthwaite's. Well, you know, when page 15, the overhead, I mean, that just reminds me of the older views of Leeds, looking at the terraced houses at Armley and Kirkstall and everything else. And it is, in a sense, what it is. It's very contextual. The upper forms of the roofs vary. I mean, we could get into details when the full application comes back, but when you look at the string courses, I think the inset balconies are excellent. Overall, I'd have to say I actually quite support it. I'm sorry members don't like it at the risk of getting sacked, but there you go. Thank you.
So that was helpful, and we're well used to your opinions on it. And we have a taste. Architecture can be a personal taste thing. But that page 12 was actually quite a nice image, I think. Anyway, it was a pinkier colour. The deep red is perhaps something that John and Dan will consider on it. But yeah, it's simple. It's designed and it fills a purpose, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay. Can I bring Al back, please?
Yes, obviously, these things are always a matter of taste. And I must say, on page 12, the apartment blocks, I can see the architectural merit of those. I was thinking more of the houses, and I should have made that clear. And I don't want frilly bits, but on the other hand, something a bit less blocky to my mind. But I'm sure that they will take that on board and come back and we can all discuss it at great length. And yes, moving to other aspects, I'm a bit concerned about the boundaries. It just looks a bit boxy to me, as if it's fenced off from all its surroundings and not in necessarily a good way. I obviously see the need for security, and we have other buildings under different ownership all the way round. But I would have welcomed a bit more access elsewhere and wondered whether you would be open to that. I know it's not just a question for developers, it's also for highways and officers. But it seems to me that there's only two pedestrian and one vehicle route in and out at the moment. And could there not be more? Looking at when we were there on the site visit today, we saw on the boundary nearest to the river that there was a fence, and then there was a bit of unclaimed land, and then there was a wall, and that may not be within the ownership of this particular site, but that just seemed to offer a possible opportunity for increased access, which might be possible to look into. Is that something you might be able to look at?
Yes, certainly, Councillor. The proposal seeks to close off the access onto the Kirkstall Road, which I think is appropriate. Create an access off Viaduct Road, and then the scheme has purposefully been designed to allow this north, south, east, west connectivity with adjoining land. It's our understanding that the land to the west is actually in Leeds City Council's ownership, the road to the sort of back of the site, shall we call it. So that's something we'll explore as part of this, in the next few weeks, because it may very well be that we can perhaps submit perhaps an illustrative scheme that shows, for example, a cycleway that runs down the back of the site. But that if you leave that with us as a point to take away, that we note that. Thank you.
Yes, there may well be children living there. And of course, there may not be many, and there may be young people of different ages. So play space that's very much geared to one particular age group wouldn't be appropriate. But I'm hoping that you can put in a few features on what does look rather plain, again, just flat green space, to allow for a bit more adventurous opportunity, we could call it, for adults as well as for any children and young people that might be living there. There was only one mention of play space, I think, right at the end of 7.6.3, that there was potential. I'd like to see that potential explored somewhat further. Is this possible?
We can explore that with officers, but my experience of proposing play space for children of different ages, in particular the older age group, is that actually often acts as a point of congregation for children, which then the neighbours object to. So if you can let me take that away and discuss it with your officers, and we'll decide on the best approach to take. But again, it's noted, so thank you.
Thank you for that, John. Thank you, Al. Can I bring Stephen in for a quick remark, or is it? Now that he hasn't been sacked, he's still among us.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Could I ask Lewis, can we have a look at PDF page 12? I'd just like to, I'm sorry to interfere, Chair, but I feel it is important, and for members to recall here, and for when the full application comes in. Anyway, on your printed versions, you'll see a site plan. That's it, I think. There's two big, thick yellow lines down the main road. Members might wish to, just to help you and recall for the applicant, that is a damn big highways culvert that they can't build on. And essentially, designing a small site like this, it has driven much of the client's design. He has no choice but to divide his site in two effectively. And he can't build on it, he can't fiddle about with things and move houses, because that is a major constraint. The culvert, I have to say, if I was doing it, I'd be really fed up with that one, but there you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Moving on then, I got Caroline, please.
Thank you, Chair. A number of questions based on the information that's in front of us, and then if I may, Chair, I'd like to come back to the issue of design. Can you confirm that the fence is owned by the mill development and will stay where it is, as shown on your images in the presentations? And the second point I want to make is what appear to be the integral garages shown on page 6, slide 3 of our packs at ground level, street level. That does not work architecturally for me at all. Now, I understand that you're working around existing constraints, and there's a reason why you haven't got habitable space at street level, but I don't think as frontages or outside, appearances, that works at all. I'm assuming that's what they are, looking at the pictures. And the third thing I wanted to say or ask is parking arrangements for that block of houses in the centre of the development. How exactly will that work, and what will it look like when everyone's at home with 2 cars per house? And then I'll come back to a design issue, if I may.
Thank you very much. Okay, so in terms of the boundaries, so your first question, that is outside our client's ownership. So that is part of the mill, and there's no intentions to alter that. So it'll stay as is. Second question regarding integral garages. Obviously, we need to provide parking, and given the fact that we are in a flood zone and we need to raise these houses by a metre and provide the habitable spaces at a metre above, it's an opportunity for us to include obviously parking whilst overcoming what is quite a significant constraint. We note your comment regarding concerns over kind of the active frontage of that, but we'd hope that within the design we can kind of, albeit there will be garages, we'd hope to be able to soften that in terms of its appearance with, we can explore landscaping, etc. And, we can hopefully come to some sort of improvement on design there if necessary. And then with regards to the parking court, obviously we have got the easement that runs on the north south, and it does limit that area of the site to, in terms of development, we can't put any houses on there. So it does mean that it's an ideal opportunity to provide parking. With regards to the number of parking spaces, we have gone through this at the pre-app stage with Jess. We are providing 100% parking, albeit we can't, state how many people will have cars in those homes. But again, we are, trying to be as transparent with that as we can be by providing 100%.
Just to add, Councillor Gruen, if I may, the roads within the site are proposed to be adopted. So clearly, the roads that adjoin that central residential area, there is the ability to double yellow line the road adjoining the houses. I'm sorry, I'm a planning consultant, not a highway consultant, but there is at least the opportunity, because they are adopted roads, to have that form of control should it be deemed necessary.
Thanks. I'll just come back on a number of things if I may. Sorry.
Sorry.
Just a clarification.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to say I've misled them on the internal. Yes. So on the fence bit, yeah, okay. So that's got to stay there. I was most uncomfortable standing behind that, and felt that it gave the impression of almost caging off the development, even though it's nothing to do with your design or your development. I just wonder if some negotiation might be carried out where you could do some soft planting next to it, near it, something to make it look less like as I say, a fenced off cage, because it's a really dreadful structure in my view, to be next to residential properties. Sorry, I've misled you on the integral garages. It's the bin stores I was referring to. It's not absolutely clear on the picture what they are, because they just look like black rectangles. It still is most unattractive architecturally. And I know you're telling me it's inevitable and it's unavoidable, and it's being worked around obstacles you can't remove, but it really does not look nice. And I can't imagine walking along a street with a number of bin stores on what should be something that I'm enjoying as I'm walking along. I'd really think that needs to be rethought. The parking sounds messy. I'm sure our highways officers will help us later on to understand better how that's intended to work. And it's fairly ironic that we're now looking at sort of traffic control measures on a scheme that presumably we're meant to be designing around, so they're not necessary. Already we're saying we're going to have to enforce things, and perhaps we should be designing environments where it's either parking or it's not parking, and we know exactly what's what. But it looks to me as if I lived in one of those central houses, I'd have quite a job parking the car and getting back to my house, but particularly if I've got toddlers, prams, luggage, anything like that with me. I'd like to come to the design, if I may, and just offer a different view. I actually quite agree with Steve. I think the sculptural quality of this is quite appropriate for the environment that it's in, and particularly next to a mill. It's always difficult to get things across, isn't it, on CGIs and pictures and things like that. For me, what matters on this is how the materials actually work visually and together. So I know you've given pictures of brickwork and what you call a varied red and all the rest of it. But I think when push comes to shove, we will need to see samples of materials and just how they work together. And for example, on slide 10 of our packs, which is page 13 of our packs, that little picture, which I think we were looking at on site this morning, it looks as if you have used two brick tones on that picture, and broken it up with two different brick tones. And you can do things like that with this sort of massing. I think that would be helpful. So I don't necessarily consider it to be bland, but I do think the materials are vital because the shapes are so stark. The materials have to do the work. And I'd like to see the materials obviously echoing the immediate surroundings. Those would be my views.
Thank you, Councillor Groom. In particular, the materials. I mean, it's absolutely vital to the success of that scheme that we get those materials right. So we will work with your planning officers and design officer to ensure that that palette is correct and is also part of the scheme that is submitted. So you have comfort when that particular matter is considered further.
Thank you for your comments. Chair, I did forget to say something that I wanted to say. May I do so now? So it's about the play area. And you were saying, well, doing play or recreational space, let's say, for older young people, if there is such a thing, tends to become places for congregating, etc. That's what young people do for recreation. They congregate. So if we can provide spaces that were made for that, instead of spaces that are not made for that, where they'll congregate anyway, it would be good. So I would like to see play for adults, play for young people, and play for children. Really, very much indeed. And not necessarily, you know, straightforward play apparatus that we've seen elsewhere, but things for people to do that are interesting.
Thank you, Councillor Gruen. I have 14 and 16-year-old sons myself, so I understand the point you're making, and yeah, we will take that away. So thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Can I bring in Kaylee now, please?
Thank you, Chair. I am largely supportive of the design. I agree with the officer and also Councillor Gruen. There's echoes of the industrial sort of past, and it feels really in keeping with the area and the heritage of the area. I think one of the things that I like about the artwork is that there's this sort of subtle detailing in the brickwork. I'd like to see maybe some more of that, because obviously if you've just got plain bricks all the same way, it's not decorative enough. I think that might be what people are maybe edging towards, perhaps. I really like to see detailing in brickwork. I find it really exciting, especially like the Victorians were incredible at it. So yeah, so that's that. Play equipment. I would like to see some outdoor gym equipment, because obviously all ages can use that. Whether you're a young person or an adult or an older person, you can use those, and it's really good for health and well-being. I have to agree that teenagers are often given a bad reputation just for existing in public. So it'd be really lovely if teenagers could be made to feel welcome in a public space. I've just written down schools, and I think I might have written down schools to ask how many school places you're expecting need to be sort of found. I've written down that I'm supportive of the massing / density. I think it's a really good mix of housing types. Oh, there's a bit in the report, 512, it says Environment Agency have raised environmental concerns, but the report doesn't go into what the concerns are. Is that because those issues have now been resolved, or is it because it's too complicated to sort of go into in a short report? And I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Kaylee, John, please, and then.
Thank you for those comments. With regard to the schools and places, we haven't looked at detail at present at that, but as discussed by David Feeney earlier, that there is a formula whereby you put in the number of dwellings, the number of bedrooms, and out is spat a expected number of children of particular ages. So we will work with your council's Children's Services Department through Jessica Ashton to look at that. So I can't give you an answer to that, but there is a process that we will follow. With regard to the Environment Agency concerns, I realise I should know the answer to that, and I'm sorry, off the top of my head, I don't know what the answer is. I might actually be cheeky and ask if Jessica Ashton can assist with that.
Okay, we don't generally consult the Environment Agency at pre-app stage, but because of the flood risk issues, we thought it was prudent to seek a view from them. And they came back in general terms, highlighting the flood risk issues and other potential issues when developing a site, a brownfield site. So there weren't necessarily sort of barriers to this development. It was more around issues which need to be taken account of at planning application stage. Okay.
Thank you for that clarification. Yes. Please, John.
Thanks, Jessica. I appreciate you. See, it's a team effort here, so thank you. Sorry, Councillor Brooks, is there anything that you particularly would like me to answer that I've not answered?
Yeah, I suppose like in terms of like fancier brickwork, is that something that you're willing to do? Because I know that there's obviously an increased cost for doing it because it's more laborious, but is that something that you're willing to look into doing? Because especially, you know, like on the houses, you can see like there's a bit of detailing here, but there's this big like bit around the roof area where there's nothing. So like, you know, I'm not a designer or an architect, but I can see that there's potential for a little bit of surface pattern possibly to break it up there.
Yeah, no, thank you for your comment. Yeah, absolutely. It's something we can explore. So obviously, as you can see on the visuals on the screen at the minute, we are introducing kind of the solid course banding between the stories. And, you know, throughout the scheme, particularly in the apartments, we have added quite a lot of articulation in the brick detailing. Now, what doesn't necessarily pull through on CGI stuff like that is that the kind of the detail that goes into that can be lost. So obviously we can, you know, provide some examples and whatnot. But yeah, we can explore that further. That's not a problem.
Certainly in the design and access statement that will obviously form part of the planning application, we can focus in on this because I mean, we were very keen to get your comments on materiality and thankfully you have provided those comments. So we'll take that on board and we'll particularly focus in on that in the design and access statement. So thank you.
Can I move on then to Peter, please?
Thanks, Chair. Lewis, would you mind putting that same slide up again, which I think, well, in ours it's called page 17, but I'll have my comment here just around, I support what colleagues have said really around young people in the area. You've got Kirkstall Road there, which is an area you don't necessarily want children to having to be crossed as often as possible. But then when you're talking about older children and young people as well, I mean, the important thing is that a neighborhood around you where people know who you are is the thing that keeps a young person the safest and the best behaved in a way. And that's always been something I've thought should follow. So if there's nothing provided for young people to hang around in this area, you'll find they will just find another area where nobody can see what they're up to. And unfortunately, that's where it probably spirals into behaviors that they wouldn't have necessarily thought of otherwise. But just talking around the design, I was going to touch a little bit. So, I mean, some of the buildings I quite like, and I think they're reminiscent of things I've seen where they've tried to do something new in estates in, say, Amsterdam or somewhere where they've tried to bring in that idea from the houses alongside the canal. No, they definitely need to modernize it and not try and hark too far to the past. But certainly the streetscape along the left side of this picture I quite like, and the houses along the back, even though you can't necessarily see them in detail, I think they could have that kind of similar feeling when you were there with just a bit of that detail. And a lot is done then around that brick detail just to make sure
people know that what you haven't done is just clumped a load of bricks there. These have been considered, and the details there in them. I'm a bit unsure though on the right hand side of the diagram and what we can see of those properties, because there is a bit of a boxy approach to those, but I think the slight problem is what we've been led to with the flood issues on there. With the flood schemes we've had around previously, one of the key things has been along the river, trying not to make them look like flood defences, shall we say. I'm afraid at the front of those houses, the walls that are there, and I think when we go on to a further diagram, there's walls round the gardens at the back that are quite high. I mean, they're reminding me more of military defences than flood defences, I think is a bit of a problem. And I was just wondering whether you thought of any other approaches that might have worked there, because walking along there, all the greenery in people's gardens is going to be way above your head, and it's going to look like a quite brick and quite stark area. So I think either we need more greenery on the street to make up for that, or a different approach to those brick walls there. Otherwise, I think there's areas where you walk along the main road through Armley where we've got houses built back up and they've got large walls outside of them, haven't they, Chair? And I don't think we do that anymore. That's a way of keeping the road out from your house rather than making it seem like a neighbourhood. So I just wondered what other thoughts you had around that. And I think it is, let me just find a picture. There is the one, what on our PDF is called 14, if you don't mind, Lewis. Thank you. Where you can see so looking out from the fence there, you've got the back gardens and there's quite a sizable brick wall around those gardens. So somebody walking down that road will have the fence on one side that Councillor Graham mentioned, and a brick wall as high as their head on the other. And they're the things that I think are worrying me. So wherever we've not had to take that treatment and it's been open to having some greenery and it's been fine. So I just wondered if there were any other thoughts you'd had on that. Maybe Steve has some thoughts on that as well.
Okay, thank you very much for the comments. I think we have the challenge of obviously overcoming the flood zone, and in doing that, it inevitably forms these boundaries. Now, what we had hoped to do is obviously use the bricks and obviously introduce some elements of detailing within that to add interest. Now, obviously, there was the opportunity there to incorporate the refuse and cycle stores within that, which now, obviously, I take on board the comments regarding the kind of the dark frontages that we've got shown at the minute. Now, they're still in the design process, so we could look to, incorporate perhaps a softer material to that. And then again, in terms of landscaping and greening up those spaces, that's something that we can explore. Now, again, to reiterate, we will have to, in its current form, have some form of boundary there. Otherwise, we can't raise off the ground by a metre. So, it's something that we will have to work with, unfortunately.
Thanks, Chair. It says we can comment. I understand the difficulties that you've got, and it's a good way of doing it, raising the houses off the floor. I'm just wondering, there's several other places where they have to do things like that, and I think they've maybe looked at it a different way, and those do look like, big brick walls are more like, as I say, military defences than flood defences in there. It may be that something like providing that kind of shutter approach, or something that harks back to that other industrial side where there's many of the properties in Amsterdam and such where you'd have wooden shutters across the front, which would be where they'd normally take access, or something like that. Or maybe we can see around some greenery around those and some planting. But I appreciate the difficulty you've got, but I think that element is probably what's creating difficulty with the design of the whole scheme, just feeling quite heavy.
So Dan, John, some challenges for you there. Can I bring in Councillor Forsyth, please?
Thank you, Chair. Right, I've just got one brief comment and then just a couple of questions, really. When I first looked at the design, I would have agreed, I think, with Councillor Garthwaite, because it did look quite bland. But actually, when we visited this morning and I looked at the context of it, and I actually do agree that it is actually a very good design for that area, and it captures the sort of industrial heritage site as it does. So that's just my one comment. This is about clarification, really. I think you've mentioned about roof gardens. Was this in reference to the individual properties, or were there any plans for the roof gardens on the flats? There's nothing there, and I don't know if you've ever done that. In terms of sort of putting the plans at this point. So that's my first question. My second question, which I think hopefully is appropriate, obviously the big challenge here is about the flood zone, and the design mitigates for possible future flooding, notwithstanding the completion of the flood, obviously the flood defences. I would ask, is 1 metre enough, is my question, and nothing certain in the future, but I thought it was a question that's worth asking at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll deal with the flood point, and then I'll let my colleague Dan deal with the roof garden. From a flood perspective, we have an appointed flood advisor, a flood and drainage advisor on board, and they have advised that that is an appropriate level. The way in which I'm looking at this particular scheme is that it's being future proofed for a 1, 2, 3 year period from a flooding perspective. And then, as you say, FAS 2, Flood Alleviation Scheme 2, comes in, and then it should be an awful lot safer. But it's our understanding and our starting point that 1 metre is sufficient at the time being.
Okay, so in reference to the roof gardens, we are proposing to include them on the houses, albeit not all of them. But in terms of the flats, at the minute, we're not showing any rooftop amenity to that, but it's something that we can take away.
Okay, I have got another round of questions from people who's already asked a question. So can I ask you, there's quite a number, can I ask you to be brief, because we do need to move on to comments, okay? I'll start with Councillor Khan, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be very, very brief. Kirkstall Road is very, very busy road, and this development is not connecting with the other existing residents communities. Is there any future plans to put like a zebra crossing, safer crossing for residents to access and connect with other existing areas? One, and the other one is, yes, previously the developers have brought some samples after they have finalized to the plans panel. Would you be able to bring those samples as well, share with us those samples? Thank you, Chair.
Can I bring Gillian on that crossing in front of it on Kirkstall Road, please? Has Highways any thoughts on that one?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, clearly we're not at the stage where we've had a transport assessment on this site yet, but we are. We had a previous one which didn't require additional crossings, but it did require upgrades to the signals. So we've certainly asked for the buildings to be set back to give us space to put in connections for cyclists, improved connections there in the future, but we haven't identified at this stage the need for any further crossings. It is something, though, that we'll have another look at when the transport assessment does come in.
For that, Jill, do you need to answer that, or shall we leave it there, John, Dan?
I mean, I think the fact is that the site, we're very purposefully setting the site back to allow changes to the paving and the cycle route provision in front of the site, so that the Kirkstall Road is improved from an accessibility and public transport accessibility perspective and cycleway. And with regard to samples, I mean, I think it's become very apparent through this discussion that samples are absolutely key. So yes, we'll look into that. And certainly my preference would be to include samples as part of the application proposal.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Councillor Khan. Kayleigh, please.
Yeah, just quickly on the hard paving. It's kind of a continuation of what Councillor Carlo was talking about, but kind of, I guess, a little bit more of a comment than a question. If you increase the planting, there's going to be less surface runoff. So, like, I think that's another benefit of it, and also potential for that water to be collected, possibly off, roofs and things like that, so that you can use that for flushing toilets, etc. Possibly.
We certainly agree with the comments regarding obviously green over hard surfacing. So that's certainly something we can incorporate. We have tried to do that as much as possible, but it's something that we could probably explore further. And we will be engaging landscape architect to assist with this. In terms of flushing toilets with rainwater, stuff like that, and obviously there's complexities to that. So it's something we'll obviously have to take away, and but it's not something that we would completely rule out, but we'd have to explore that further, definitely.
You Dan, Caroline, please.
Really briefly, there are some good examples of green walls around the city, and I'm just wondering if that might be one technique you take into consideration for the street that I was so concerned about, with bin stores at street level and gardens above your head level, as Councillor Carlo was saying. And the other point is, I can see some of the pictures that show steps rising to what presumably is front entrances, but entrances to the houses anyway. Quite steep steps with no rails. So I think you would need to look at that in terms of disability.
Thanks, Caroline. I'm sure you've taken note of that. Dan, do you want to come in?
No, that's no. We just kind of acknowledge that. Yeah, it's just in terms of the CGI, there would be handrails there. Obviously these would need to be building regulation compliant. So, just we have acknowledged that. Thank you.
Thank you. Colin, please.
Couple of questions. Following Mr. Varley's rebuke, I'm looking again at, can you pull up slide, it says 9 on ours, though it says 6 underneath the slide. That's the one. Yeah. So I was looking again at the left hand, my right hand side, the terrace. Okay. Now that terrace, there are 2 elements that I'd like to ask a question about. Number one is it appears to have no ground floor habitable rooms, and therefore is it effectively a blank facade, which I understood was not council policy. So I wonder if you could explain how you might deal with that particular issue in relation particularly to getting more, I suppose, eyes on the ground. And the second point relates to the green area behind it, which I'm assuming is public open space because it isn't marked off as gardens. And it strikes me that if we take up Caroline's point about younger people, that's an ideal spot for them to meet together and make as much noise as they can. Though I don't think the people who live there would be too happy about it. So I just wonder why you've got that green sliver there, because it doesn't seem to fulfill any function. The other green space I can understand because that's a central area, but that's behind the properties. And unless and until something happens next door or on the next site, that's going to be a dead area. And I really wonder whether in designing your layout, you might want to move that terrace both in style, form and position, and move that green space to make it a more visible area. And the second question that I've got is for Julian. And if you look at the the street design, does that meet our street design guide? As you know, it's that document's my favourite bedtime reading, and it doesn't seem to reflect the tree planting type of boulevard that we're projecting. So I could ask those two questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just go to the trees because there are other little things. I mean, the turning area was mentioned earlier, but in terms of the trees, I think the current adopted street design guide allows for trees in the highway. The new transport SPD that is to be adopted very shortly would require trees in the highway. So clearly this is, at the moment as it's shown, isn't meeting our new guidance, but that isn't adopted yet. So I suppose we're in that in-between position. We do have further discussions we need to have with the applicants in terms of issues such as the parking for the blocks at the south, being just in one long lay-by, that we can't, you know, it has to be, if it is as it's shown, has to be part of the highway, couldn't be allocated, all those sorts of issues. And we wouldn't want a lay-by of that length with no trees or landscape or breaking up anyway, in the design. So I think the parking solution, there's still a little bit of work left to be done on that anyway. Just in terms of this, I just wanted to go back to one of the things that was said earlier, which was about the fact that there's 100% parking. My understanding is that's for the houses only. So overall on the site, there is less than 100% parking provision. But I think, you know, it's one of these where we've got sites in the vicinity of this where we've happily accepted significantly less than 100% car parking. This is just getting that little bit further out. We'd like to be able to limit the car parking here, but I think we certainly would need some ability to control parking on the streets within the site if we were to do that and go along that route. But it's still something we want to do, and we'd be discussing as part of the negotiations for any planning application.
Okay, with regards to the sliver of green at the back of the terrace on the right hand side of the plan, those are actually the gardens belonging to those terraces.
Councillor, I think what's happened is the
Sorry, on my version, you can't tell that.
I think sorry, Councillor, I think it's just it's the way in which the image has come through on the master version that we've sent through. There is a dark green line separating the slightly less green back gardens, but the intention for that terrace is that there will be back gardens, and hence those back gardens will back onto the very back of the site. So that point has been acknowledged, and it is not an issue.
Can we move on to comments then, please? We have strayed into comments all along, but we do that all the time, I guess. So strayed. Okay, Dan. Yeah. Well, we ventured down that road then, shall we say? Okay. Quite a lot of questions there. Very, very forensic. Thank you very much for that. Any comments? Al, you please.
Yes, I think that my comments at the beginning about when I said frills and no frills and so on, were really relating to the houses, particularly those at the back. And I agree with Councillor Brooks that having different styles of brickwork and so on would alleviate that very flat looking appearance of them, which I would certainly welcome, and indeed on the walls as well. There's I do agree that it reflects the heritage, and particularly the apartment blocks, I think, do that, and I do like them. I also agree with the idea of exercise equipment. I think that's a very good one, and more greenness. And I understand the issues posed by the culvert and the problems there,
But one other thing, which I perhaps didn't mention, on page 14, slide number 11, there's what looks like halfway down the road, if you were coming from Kirksville Road, a left turning off with quite high walls on either side, and it looks dark in the CGI. And that is the sort of access route that causes people to feel quite alarmed. And if that is to stay, it needs good lighting, but I would like it to be perhaps opened up, because I think people both feel and are safer in a more open type of environment where you can see around you, rather than what looks like rather a dark, narrow corridor leading somewhere where you might feel hesitant to go in there. And of course you need to. And then I stand by my comments at the beginning, which I think Councillor Gruen said, that the fencing round made it feel a bit fenced in, and anything you can do to open it up and give more access points. So particularly in the southwest corner, you could feel a bit trapped in a corner, possibly. But generally, despite all this sounding very critical, I really welcome this development. I think it's great to have affordable housing, and 100%. It's really good, and I think it will be a great asset to the area.
Thank you, Al. Colin, please.
I agree. I think actually this is potentially quite a good development for this particular, because it's very different to a lot of the other ones we've got along Kirksville Road, and so we'd like it to go ahead, I think, wouldn't we? But it's always the same. We always have to raise a number of issues. So I have raised the issue about the terrace on the right hand side of the drawing. I understand about the gardens at the back, but I am not happy because the garages are on ground floor level and the habitable rooms are above, and that, to the best of my knowledge, Mr. Valley, is not council policy. I look at you for that one. So I would like that somebody to look at that if possible. There's a reference to green space shortfall. I think I need justification as to why there's a shortfall, because quite frankly, this is an area where green space is at a premium. I don't accept the principle that if there's a parking issue, we can put yellow lines down. I think we need to design that out before we even get there. So we need to look at the way the roads are laid out and the way the pavements are laid out and the way we can design effectively to make it impossible for you to park on the pavement or on the road in the wrong place. I agree with what a lot of the comments that we made in relation to the ground, effectively the ground floor facades. They do look a bit blank actually. I'd have certain concerns about walking through some of those. I think you can do things with them. Play equipment is fine, but I, like Caroline, we're of the same view. I think that I always find if you provide people with a swing, it's very good because they can swing on it, but they can't do anything else with it. If you provide somebody with a rock, they can do all sorts with it. Not I'm suggesting a rock. Exercise equipment is interesting. I look at the exercise equipment we put in Otley, and that's used extensively by young people, children. So you really need to provide a bench for their parents to sit and watch them play. That's aside. I was mindful of Councillor Latty at a point during there, because at this point he would have been talking about chimneys. And we go back to this principle about the roof line. We need to vary the roof line. But as a whole, with a few tweaks, I think this is actually a very good development, and we should be supported.
Thank you, Colin. Very positive remarks there. Councillor Khan, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's going to be a remarkable development, and also welcome 100% affordable housing. And I've got a bit of concern. I don't want to see this development on its own island, and it's be connecting with other existing residents and communities. And just following from Colin, Liz Nash, if she was here, she would be talking about trees. Yes, we do definitely need greenery in the area and landscaping. And as I said, it's going to be one of the remarkable developments. Thank you.
I haven't any more comments. Councillor Groom, please.
Just to echo what's been said, I welcome 100% affordable, and I think it's got loads of potential and it's in the right area at the right time. I just hope that when it comes back to us, there have been significant adjustments made and some of the points that we've made are reflected in future presentations.
I also am really excited about the 100% affordable. I've not mentioned it as to yet because I mean, you know, we all of us around the table get very excited about affordable housing. It's not just me, but we're also very excited for well-designed places, whether they're affordable or just regular development. I'd just like to say, in terms of residents as well, residents are really going to welcome this, with it being affordable and including so much family housing. So I'd like to thank the developers for bringing it forward on behalf of residents. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Very generous comments, and thanking our developers. It's a compliment to you. We don't often get a chance to say that to developers, so take that away with you. Dan, please. You've been silent, Dan. I've been waiting to hear from you all.
Well, I would have hated to disappoint you, Chair. Actually, I've been quiet because fundamentally I agree with very much with what Mr. Varley said, as I regularly do. But obviously colleagues are keen to see a number of adjustments, and I think the developers will be well advised to listen. I don't massively feel strongly. I say I agree with Councillor Grun about the fencing. I think that's absolutely a very well made point, although not entirely within your gift. And so, of course, if it came back with no change on that, it wouldn't be something we'd be able to do a great deal about because it's not within your control. But I think it's a very well made point. I absolutely agree with my good friend Councillor Khan. This is a great development. And the sooner it comes for a full application and the sooner we can get it built and delivered, the better the city will be. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dan. Councillor Forsyth, please.
Right, thank you very much. I also think this looks a very interesting and quite exciting 100% affordable development. Just a couple more points just from what Councillor Brooks was saying about the rainwater harvesting. In terms of affordability and living especially in the way forward with the cost of living crisis, the idea of the housing being not just affordable but in every sense. So in terms of the energy and trying to make the properties as close to passive house standards as possible, thinking about solar roof tiles, as well as things like the rainwater harvesting would reduce the cost of running these homes. Thank you.
Any final comments? Can I just make one please to you, Jill? It was mentioned by John that the roads would be adaptable and responsibility of the City Council. I can imagine them being parked up, without any restrictions on it. And the last thing I think we want to see is multiple cars along there. I'm sure Dan and John would agree with that. So I think careful consideration needs to be taken. It's an area where there's low parking permitted, and I wouldn't want to see it. We've seen that already, as John and Dalgid will know, on the Yorkshire Post site when we did visit it. And there was a lot of parking on the roads, which was never intended to happen. I know you're dealing with that, and I won't raise that, but the potential is there for a lot of parking unless there is some type of restriction. And the last thing we want to see is that. Okay, I think that concludes. And thank you for the very positive comments. And the helpful comments, I have to say, to guide the development, and it's been taken note of by Dan and John. I'm sure when it comes back, lots of those issues will be addressed. But in the meantime, we're on to 7.92 on page 31, and we have a number of questions. And maybe we won't be able to address them all, but we can offer our opinion now. The first one, do members endorse the approach to mitigating flood risk within the development? Is that a general yes? Okay.
Well, I think that's a yes, but I don't really, I'm not clear what it is other than lift the central block, the meter. And I think I'd like to better understand how that's going to work.
Caroline, please.
I would like a more considered approach to how that's put in place. So I couldn't give a straight yes to the answer to that question. It's created some unpleasant streets.
Yep. Okay, well, we've heard it. Perhaps more information needed at the outline. But in general, you know, there was general improvement, I think. Do members support the approach to housing mix? Oh, yes, I think that's a wow. Yes, please. Yes. Do members support the proposed approach to private external amenity space? I think we have made comments regarding that, haven't we? Regarding play equipment. Okay, but with comments from members, I think it might be a yes. Okay. Do members support the proposed scale and form of the development? Yeah, I think that's definitely a yes. Do members consider the emerging approach to landscaping and public realm is acceptable? There was mention of more trees, but any a bit more creative? Yeah, let's go for the best. Subject to fully addressing highway services comments, do members support the approach to car parking, including phased provision of electric vehicle charging points?
I'm just clarifying.
Yeah, please.
Sorry, at the time we wrote the report, the proposal was for phased provision of electric vehicle charging points, but as you members have heard, the proposal now is 100% provision from occupancy.
Yeah. Okay. So that is definitely yes. We will always support 100%. Yep. Okay. Well, I think just remains for me to thank Dan and John and for bravely answering the question and adding value to the suggestions from members. But thank you for that, and we look forward to this application coming back. And you did say within a short time frame, 6 to 8 weeks. Well, we meet every 4 weeks, so if it's not 4 weeks, it'll be 8 weeks, but we look forward to it. And thank you for bringing that application to us.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor McKenna. I'd just like to thank the officers for their input to date. It's a particularly important process that we go through, this bouncing ideas off each other through the pre-app process, and this form of opportunity that not all councils have to actually hear directly from the elected members is warmly welcome and greatly appreciated. So thank you very much.
Very warm words. Thank you. I did, John, before you. I agreed with members that was touched on earlier about the fence and connectivity. I do feel that area is meant to be connected up to the river all the way down, and we wouldn't want to see it gated or a standalone. It may not be within your control. I'm very much aware that it has been sold off from the firm that owned it. But it would be good if we can get the connectivity that our policies design on that one. So maybe some negotiation and some good neighbourish comments might help on that one. But with that, sorry for jumping in at the end, but I had forgotten to mention it. But can I thank you all for your attendance and safe journey home?
This application has been closed, that's fine. Chair, I don't know if this is the right place or the platform to ask advice or raise an issue with Leeds and Bradford Airport, the charges. I know you have been experienced with some charges, and there's other people have approached me as well some excesses charges from Leeds and Bradford Airport. Is this the right platform or place to?
There's nothing to stop us mentioning it, but it's not a good forum for progressing, I have to say. Maybe development plans panel. It may well come back in another form, the airport. You know, I haven't, now that air travel has taken off a bit. But
Can I?
sorry? Taken off. Oh, no, the flood. Yeah, I did say about flooding as well, and nobody picked up on it earlier.
I was just going to say, but that's not,
quite
you
frankly,
whichever
Chair,
comments
you're
you wish
stuck with-
during a meeting, the meeting is now closed, but perhaps this is something that can be taken outside, and if necessary, a report be presented by David in relation to the issues you've identified.
I think that's right. I mean, without going into it, and I hear the warning, I always listen to our legal eagles on this one. I had fully intended to raise my issue at Chair's planning chairs meeting, you know, which is probably the right place to do it. And we would go on to other forums, perhaps with an agenda item. Dan.
But